Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gautama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Good morning, everyone. Just get started by welcoming all of you guys here at the temple and everyone who's joining us online. We're going to start our class today with the meditation to realize non-self. And I'll guide you guys in this meditation. I'll start with the chanting, and then I'm not going to do the guidance for the breathing mindfulness meditation part. I'll just let you guys do that because you're getting more and more used to doing that on your own. Then I'm going to come in with the guidance for the meditation to realize non-self. Then we'll go back to breathing mindfulness meditation and then come out with the chanting. And then after that, the topic for this morning is the 5 hindrances, removing your obstacles to enlightenment. This is the 5 things that the Buddha taught that are going to obstruct you from actually getting to enlightenment. And then I'm going to be teaching you how to determine if you've actually attained enlightenment, because this is something you're going to need to know, because once you attain it, you would like to know that the mind has attained enlightenment. So these are the only 2 topics that we're going to discuss today. We'll probably finish up, prior to lunch and be all done. And if you guys would like to go out and do a group lunch, we can. Or if you'd like to go out and do some activity together, we can do that kind of thing. Or if you would like to just go home and just in class that way, you can do that too. Totally up to you guys. But we'll probably finish just before lunch today. So welcome again to all of you guys here and everyone joining us at home through the live stream. If you'd like to join for the meditation and the chanting, feel free to join in. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakava Potang Mahakavanhang Apivatiyami Savakato Mahakavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami Namo Rasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Rasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Rasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso mahakava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang sammuno Sakato rokavitu Anutero purisa Dhamma sati satatawa panu Saranam Bhutto Bhagavati. Continuing to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose. Repeat these affirmations in the mind on the out breath. I am not the body. I am not the body. I am not the body. I am not the mind. I am not the mind. I am not the mind. There is no self. There is no self. There is no self. I do not exist. I do not exist. I do not exist. I am not the body. I am not the mind. There is no self. I do not exist. I am not the body. I am not the mind. There is no self. I do not exist. I am not the body. I am not the mind. There is no self. I do not exist. Now return back to breathing mindfulness meditation, focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมะขวาพุทธังมะขวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาขวัตตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาขวัตโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมะขวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตาวะมานุสนังโอโตภะคะวะเตOkay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation. Once again, welcome to all of you guys here. Welcome to everyone online as well. Nice to see that everyone's joining us this morning for this particular class. This is the last day of our 5-day course. And what I'm going to be sharing with you this morning is the 5 hindrances, removing obstructions to your enlightenment. But before we go into that, I would like to see if there's any questions on this meditation to realize non-self, because you guys just learned it and did it the first time yesterday, and then this is the second time. Just like to check in and see if there's any questions about this meditation or really any meditations, because oftentimes students are building up their meditation practice and you might have questions about your meditation practice. Is there anything you guys would like to ask about meditation? Yeah, go ahead. For all of you guys online, if you would like to ask questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions that you like. So anything and everything you'd like to ask about meditation.
I get when doing the non-self meditation, I find I was getting stuck on using the word I sometimes. Mm-hmm. And in the past, I've used like, this is not me or mine. But then when I use the word I, sometimes I'm thinking like, oh, it doesn't feel right to use the word I, because I'm trying to get rid of the concept of I at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can change that to this being is not the body. You can do it that way too. Same thing with loving kindness meditation. Sometimes students, instead of saying, may I be peaceful, you might say, may this being be peaceful. Or you could say your name, like, may Doche be peaceful, these kinds of things. So here you can even say Doche is not the body, it's not the mind, or you can say this being. These are ways to remove the I out of that. So if you'd like to do that, feel free to do that.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, you're welcome. Leo's got a question too.
And it was only saying the sentence, without visualization, the body. Or I can also do that, I think. But is it only saying the sentence and that's it?
You're saying the affirmation in your mind, but if you would like to direct it to the body, like as you're sitting there and you're thinking, I am not the body, or this being is not the body, you can be thinking about the body, right? You can be visualizing the body and realizing and creating this separation between the body and this being. This being is not this body, right? So you can do that inside, internally, within your own mind. And the same thing with the mind, and there is no self. You can visualize these things if you like. This can be helpful.
Like looking down to the body, for example.
Yeah, sometimes actually in meditation, that actually happens by itself, where as you're even just doing breathing mindfulness meditation, as your mind is going to a higher consciousness, there's situations where you can look down on your body, not that you've induced it, but it just actually happens. And this is where you can see that the mind and the body are two separate things, because the mind can be looking down at the body. And this is part of the confirmation for a practitioner to be able to see that the body is one thing and the mind something completely separate.
Is this then a jhana, the first jhana or something?
When that's happening, it could be in the jhanas, but it could be outside the jhanas too, that before the jhanas it can happen. So it's not associated with the jhanas, but it can happen there as well. But it's not just associated with the jhanas.
And then only, then that's it, is also an option, right? I can also do that.
Yeah.
Only say the sentence.
Yeah, you can just say the sentence if that's what you're getting used to, just getting the sentence going. But as you get going, if you would like to visualize these things, you surely can. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see if Ken has a question. Go ahead, sir.
What occurred for me was there seemed to be a little struggle with there is no body, there is no mind, there is no self, and there was almost a little internal struggle going on. Like I wanted to hold on to self and mind and body.
Mm-hmm.
I just found that.
That's what this meditation's for. So if you experience that, then you're doing it well. That's the way that the mind is usually going to respond to it. As you're saying these things, the mind's going to try to grab on and hold on because it doesn't want to let go. So this is great that that's occurring, because as the mind's starting to pull away and realizing that there is no self, it's going to try to hold on. So if you're experiencing that, that's exactly what's going to happen. But ultimately, the mind needs to let go. And as I was saying yesterday, that as you're doing this meditation, it can sometimes feel like you're walking off a cliff. And it can be very scary. There were times where I would do it like maybe on a Monday, and I got very fearful because I was trying to let go of this self, and I couldn't do it again until like the next week, on Monday or something like that, because the mind was trying to get comfortable with this idea that there is no self. So the more you understand it, the more you study the personal existence view, you realize it's not an idea, it's not a concept, that it's true reality, that there really is nothing here. It's just physical structures. It's just a mind that's come together. And this meditation is going to help you peel that away, be able to see that and realize that, yeah, there's nothing here, just physical structures and a mind. That's it. Mm-hmm. Okay, looks like Rachel has a question. If you'd like to go ahead, ma'am.
It is a meditation in standing, and I have a question on where do I put my hands when I do it in standing?
Standing meditation, you can either grasp the wrist lightly in front of you. You can put your hands and arms along the sides of your body, or you can clasp your wrist behind you. These are the three options that you can just put your hands in front, side, or behind.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. And I have another question, that is, I found when I was standing, I couldn't stand steadily, like with slight movement at my feet.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I didn't understand the first part.
I couldn't understand steadily when I do the meditation in standing. Kind of like slightly.
Are you guys? Oh, are you saying you're having challenges standing steadily?
Yes.
Okay, so is the body swaying or circling, or what's happening?
Swaying, yeah, swaying.
Swaying.
The feet touching the floor. They are not steady.
Yeah, this is common. You can have this in the seated position, in the standing position, where there's this involuntary swaying. In the seated position, it can be circling, where the body starts to circle. This is just the mind starting to let go. So if you're experiencing this, just keep coming back to the breath and focus on the breath. The body's going to do whatever the body's going to do. It's interesting how this occurs. It's not permanent, but it may happen for a few weeks or a few months before you can get stable and steady. This is the mind stabilizing. Even the Buddha talks about this, that prior to enlightenment, that the body will sway, but by the time you're training your mind more and more, there won't be any shaking or swaying in the body during meditation. So just keep focusing on the breath, keep cutting off any thoughts that are coming up, and just keep coming back to the breath.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see. Don't see anything on Facebook or YouTube. So let's move into the topic for this morning, which is the 5 hindrances, removing obstructions to your enlightenment. These are the 5 things that the Buddha talked about that are going to obstruct you from actually attaining enlightenment. A lot of what we talk about on the path to enlightenment is how to attain enlightenment. Well, here we're going to explain that as well, because you need to eliminate these things, but these are the things that are going to stop you from attaining enlightenment. And here's some words from the Buddha to help you understand that he did teach the 5 hindrances. He says, monks, there are these 5 hindrances. What 5? The hindrance of sensual desire, the hindrance of ill will, the hindrance of complacency, the hindrance of restlessness and worry, the hindrance of doubt. These are the 5 hindrances. This noble eightfold path is to be developed for direct knowledge or experience of these 5 hindrances, for the full understanding of them, for the complete destruction, for their abandoning. So this is just one place where the Buddha is referencing the 5 hindrances, but he talks about it in other places as well. Not only is the Eightfold Path a teaching that you need in order to eliminate the 5 hindrances, but also the 7 factors of enlightenment. The Buddha talks about this in his teachings too. So here he's making sure that you understand that it's the Eightfold Path that you need as a foundational teaching in order to eliminate these 5 hindrances. But there's another discourse where he also talks about the 7 factors of enlightenment are a solution for eliminating the 5 hindrances. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to the 5 hindrances, but then I'm going to teach you the 7 factors of enlightenment, because I might have introduced this to you if you took the Foundation in the Path to Enlightenment course, where I introduced you to the 7 factors of enlightenment. But here I'm going to teach it to you so you can see how to apply it. These 7 factors, they're not to determine whether you are enlightened or aren't enlightened. They're actually tools to fine-tune the mind, so you'll be able to see that when I teach it to you. But first, just kind of talking about the 5 hindrances from a high level. The 5 hindrances have similarities to the 10 fetters. As you see, 4 of the 5 hindrances are actually fetters. So we've got sensual desire, ill will, complacency, restlessness, and worry, and doubt. Sensual desire is part of the 10 fetters. Ill will is part of the 10 fetters. Complacency is not part of the 10 fetters. Restlessness is part of the 10 fetters, but not the worry part. And then the hindrance of doubt, this is part of the 10 fetters as well. So one of the common things that you'll see with the teachings of the Buddha is this overlapping, or this kind of referencing different teachings. From within one teaching, he will reference another teaching, because he's assembling the teachings that you need to understand for that particular topic. So for the particular topic of the 5 hindrances, he's pulling in these things that are actually 5 hindrances. So I'm going to be describing these for you and helping you to understand what the solutions are. You might already know some of these solutions if you remember back to the 10 fetters discussion that I did on Tuesday. So it's learning the Eightfold Path while eliminating the 10 fetters, including the 7 factors of enlightenment that will ultimately eliminate these 5 hindrances. So the Buddha's teachings are oftentimes pointing to each other. They're kind of layered on top of each other. You can see that not only here with the 5 hindrances and the 10 fetters, but you can see that with things like the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts. These things are all kind of feeding into each other and layering them on top of each other. So if there's struggles or you're noticing impediments on the path to enlightenment, it makes sense to look at the 5 hindrances and see which one of these or multiple of these are you facing. So when I was talking yesterday, we were talking about sexual contact. I think it was a question that Steve had, and we were talking about, you could go in that direction and you could do those particular things, but you need to be observant that the mind can get indulged in that and it can have difficulties getting out of that. That's because sensual desire is a hindrance. It'll keep you trapped into that unenlightened state, so you can kind of get indulged in something like a sensual pleasure, not just sexual activity, but other things too. The mind can hold on to these things. Like say you have 1 glass of wine every night after work, and there's this sensual pleasure through the tongue. The mind can hold on to this, and now the mind, having held on to this, it's a hindrance to their enlightenment because the mind's still having sensual desire. So these 5 hindrances are something that you can look at as you're having challenges on the path and see which one, or maybe multiple, are you encountering that's causing difficulties and stopping you from creating progress on the path to enlightenment. So I'm going to teach you guys the 7 factors of enlightenment, because in a lot of these cases with these 5 hindrances, these are the solutions. So you need to know the solutions before I explain to you the 5 hindrances, so that when I explain to you the 5 hindrances, I can explain to you what it is, and I can explain to you what the solution is. So let me explain to you what the 7 factors of enlightenment are. These, as I mentioned, they're not to determine whether you are enlightened or you aren't enlightened. These are the fine-tune the mind. It's like a fine tool to go in and fine-tune the mind. If you think about getting to enlightenment like you're creating a sculpture, you're sculpting this better and better human being, that you're becoming this better and better human being. Think about like a big raw piece of wood. If you were going to sculpt this down into like a figurine of a beautiful person, you'd probably start with like an axe or a hatchet, and you start chopping off big chunks of wood at the very beginning when you have this big raw piece of wood. And then as you chop it down more and more and more, eventually you get to the point where you need to put in the eyelashes or the wrinkles around the eyes, and you'd probably go in with like a razor blade or some fine tool in order to go in and put these fine lines around the eyes and things like this. Well, the teachings of the Buddha are similar. Like I mentioned, you're sculpting this better and better human being. And when you first get started, you're chucking off big chunks of wood. You're chucking off wrong view and wrong intention and wrong speech and wrong action and wrong livelihood and wrong effort and wrong mindfulness and wrong concentration. You're chucking off these big chunks of wood at the very beginning, and that's what you're focused on, is getting rid of those things. But then as you're starting to experience the jhanas that we talked about in this course, then you need to go in with the fine tool, like the 7 factors of enlightenment, to be able to fine tune the mind. Because remember, when we talked about the jhanas, I was talking about how the mind swings, that oftentimes you can be experiencing this gladness and this excitement in the jhanas, but then the mind can swing to the other side and you can experience this sadness. And they can be these sudden shifts in the mind. And you need to be observant of that. That's what the first factor of the 7 factors of enlightenment is, which is mindfulness. This mindfulness that the Buddha is talking about is the same mindfulness from the Eightfold Path. This is the layering that the Buddha does. So the mindfulness is the guard. This is the guard of your mind. The Buddha talks about this constantly in his teachings, where you're using this awareness of mind to guard the mind. Whereas if you're walking down the street and you're not having mindfulness, you don't realize you're judging that person walking at you, or you don't realize that you're having a craving to go into that weed shop or whatever it is. You smell the weed, you go right into the shop, and next thing you know, you're smoking some substance, right? So if you have mindfulness and you're guarding your mind, this is what's going to help you to then be able to implement the other factors that you need. Because what mindfulness is awareness of the mind. Generally, you can think of mindfulness in that way, just awareness of mind. But more specifically, as I've taught you, that it's the 4 foundations of mindfulness: having awareness of the bodily sensations associated with the discontentedness that's arising, whether it's a conditioned pleasant feeling, painful feeling, or neither painful nor pleasant. There's going to be some bodily sensation that is arising, and you need to be aware of that, because that's where you would like to cut that off and let it go. Then if you miss it as a bodily sensation, it's going to become a feeling, where now the mind is excited and thrilled, or it's sad or lonely or bored or some other discontent feeling. So it moves from the bodily sensation to the feeling. So the bodily sensations are an early warning system alerting you, hey, you're about to get angry, or hey, you're about to get so excited over that thing. The bodily sensations are that early warning system so that you can take action. And if you aren't aware of those bodily sensations right now, that's one of the things that are benefiting you in the breathing mindfulness meditation, is helping you to develop that awareness of those bodily sensations associated with your cravings, desires, attachments, and the arising of discontentedness. So you can take action applying right effort when you notice the bodily sensations. But if you miss it there, it'll become a feeling. And you can take action there too. You can apply right effort to cut it off and let it go. If you miss it there, it's going to start affecting the condition of the mind. This is why at certain times in your life, you've been agitated for a few hours or a few days, or maybe a week or two. You were just generally grumpy and agitated about something that happened a week ago or 2 weeks ago, because you didn't know the 4 foundations of mindfulness and you didn't cut it off as a bodily sensation. You didn't cut it off as a feeling. So then it affected the condition of your mind for a few hours, a few days, or a week or two. And then what it's doing is it's feeding what's called a mental object. A mental object is a deeply rooted container in the mind. And all of the 10 fetters are mental objects, as well as the 5 hindrances. These are mental objects. These are deeply rooted containers. And the mind is feeding those and filling it up and making it more and more strong and more rooted. So you're trying to put this blockade at the bodily sensations and cut off and let go there, so that meanwhile you can be breaking up these mental objects and uprooting them and getting them out of the mind. When we talk about purifying the mind on the path to enlightenment, it's to break up these mental objects, these 10 fetters, to break them up and get them out, to eradicate them from the mind. So you're going to need to have ultimately awareness of these 10 fetters through intellectually understanding what they are, through reflecting on it to be able to see the truth, and then practicing so that with your mindfulness, you can see the symptoms of these 10 fetters. So since we talked a good deal about conceit in this class, the arrogance, the pride, the measuring, the comparing, you're going to need to have mindfulness or awareness of mind when that is arising in your mind, right? And it's going to start as a bodily sensation. It's going to then become a feeling. It's then going to affect the condition of the mind, and it's going to feed this mental object. So you need to have awareness of that mental object so that whenever it's raising its ugly head, you can cut it off and let it go. And this is going to cut it down and cut it down, cut it down. It's kind of like a weed that's growing, and you're cutting it back and 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 cutting it back, cutting it back, cutting it back, and eventually uprooting it out of the mind. And then it won't actually grow anymore. But as long as it's there, it's going to have the potential to grow. So that's why you have to keep cutting it back and cutting it back and cutting it back constantly, particularly something like conceit. It'll take many years to be able to fully eradicate that from the mind before you finally uproot it. But it's the mindfulness that is going to help you do all of this. So the Buddha teaches in terms of the 7 factors of enlightenment that we should always be practicing mindfulness from early morning when you're first starting to awaken in the bed, all day long, and even when you're falling asleep at night, because your thoughts can invade you when you're waking up in the morning. Oh, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to go to that place. Or, oh, do I have to see her today? I really don't want to see her today or him today. Oh, gosh. Just as you're starting to wake up, you can set off your day on a negative foot. So you got to see that your thoughts are invading you with your mindfulness and cut that off. And then all through the day, but then even at night as you're falling asleep, your thoughts can invade you. So you need to be attentive to the mind. And if you see any unwholesome thoughts coming into the mind, even as you're dozing off to sleep, you need to cut it off and let it go. So this is the mindfulness, practicing right mindfulness from the Eightfold Path. This is the first factor of the 7 factors, the first factor that is then going to allow you to apply all the others. Because next, the grouping is investigation, energy, and joy. This is what you practice when your mind's sluggish. So when you notice with your mindfulness that your mind is sluggish and dull and lethargic, you would like to do just the opposite. You would like to investigate, which is investigate the teachings. You'd like to penetrate into them. You like to read books, come to the class, watch a video, listen to a podcast, read the book, listen to the audiobook, reach out to your teacher for an appointment. You'd like to investigate the teachings. As you're investigating the teachings and studying the teachings, this is going to spring up energy in the mind, where the mind's going to become energetic, coming out of that complacent state. And then when the mind is experiencing this energy, then you'll notice this joy springing up in the mind, this unconditional joy, where it's not based on any particular object. It's just joyful because it's joyful. So this is what's going to bring you out of that dull, lethargic, sluggish state, is practicing investigation, energy, and joy. So it's just the opposite. It's bringing the mind to the middle. Because when the mind's dull and lethargic, the last thing you're interested in is picking up a book and reading the book, or watching a video about the Buddhist teachings, perhaps. So by you choosing to do the opposite of what the mind's doing, the person is now training the mind. Because we have this body and we have this mind, and then the combination of these things is the person. That's what we call the person. So the person needs to be able to see the mind and be like, I see you, little girl. I see you, little boy. You're trying to be sluggish. You're trying to be dull and lethargic. I'm not going to let you do that. You're going to need to come over here and investigate the teachings of the Buddha. No, I don't want to do that, right? That's what your mind's going to do. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to the temple. I just want to lay here on the sofa. Why are you taking me to the temple? Please don't go, right? And you're like, nope, you're going to come over to the temple. Let's go. We're going to go have a good time. We're going to go see our friends. Let's go. No, please, right? So your mind's going to fight you. So you're doing just the opposite of what the mind wants to do, which the mind wants to sit there and just be dull and lethargic. And you're having to arise this ambition, this motivation, this vigor. That's what the enlightenment factor of energy is. So after you're investigating the teachings, now there's this effort, this determination, this ambition, initiative, motivation, this vigor, this enthusiasm, this willingness to do something. This is arising in the mind. So now, after you investigate the teachings of the Buddha, maybe you go out and ride your bike, or maybe you go for a walk, or go play tennis, right? Or go do something energetic, willingness to do something instead of just being dull and lethargic. Pick the mind up. And this is where the joy springs in, right? It's like, oh, wow, this is fun playing tennis, or, oh, this is great going for a walk in the park, or, oh, this is nice going for a bike ride, right? So this is where the joy springs up in the mind. But then you can have the opposite effect of this too, is the mind can be excited. That you notice with the mindfulness or awareness of mind, that the mind's in this excited state, this elated state. Maybe even having a bit of anxiety, perhaps, to a certain degree, where the mind's up here in this excited state. And that's where these next three factors come in: tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. You would like to notice with your mindfulness that the mind's in this excited state, and now you'd like to bring in the tranquility, which is the relaxed, steady, stable peacefulness, the stillness of mind. This is going to then help you to promote concentration, where you have this alertness, this attentiveness, the ability to give your attention to a single object. Because your mind, when it's in an excited state, it's going to be bouncing all over the place, right? It's going to be hopping around from thing to thing to thing. So you'd like to bring in this concentration, this singleness of mind, and then also bring in this equanimity, this mental calmness and composure, evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. That's what you'd like to bring in, to bring the mind out of this excited state. But there is another part to equanimity, which is treating everyone impartially. This doesn't really factor into the 7 factors of enlightenment, but I just kept this particular part of the definition of equanimity so people know that equanimity is more than just evenness and composure of mind, which that's a big part of equanimity. But that root word of equanimity is equal, where you're treating everybody equally and fairly. But in terms of the 7 factors of enlightenment, you're bringing in this calmness, this composure, evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. So say you get a phone call from the hospital that your mom's been in a terrible accident and she's in the back of an ambulance on her way to the hospital. And your mind's like, oh my goodness. And you go to this excited state. You notice that with your mindfulness, right? Bring in the equanimity, calm down. Calm down. Let me get my keys. Let me patiently make my way to the hospital. Racing across town isn't going to solve anything. She's in the best hands she could be. She's in the back of an ambulance with emergency medical technicians. She's about to arrive to a hospital. There's nothing I'm going to solve by racing across town to get to the hospital. Instead, let me take my time. make my way to the hospital, not get in an accident. And then when I show up, I can talk to the doctors and the nurses and make some wise decisions because my mind will be calm and I can talk to the doctors and understand what's going on. But allowing the mind to be in that excited state where it's, jumping around isn't going to solve anything. So that's why the Buddha is teaching you to bring in this tranquility, this concentration, focusing on your driving, focusing on getting to the hospital, and then this equanimity, this calmness, and this composure. Right? So this is going to lift the mind out of the sluggish, lethargic state, and it's going to bring the mind down from that excited state. And it's the mindfulness that you're practicing at all times to be able to allow you to invoke these. So these are like tools on your tool belt. And if you have these tools with your mindfulness, whenever you see the mind sluggish, to bring in the investigation, energy, and joy. Whenever you see the mind excited, to bring in the tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And now more and more, the mind comes to the middle. And this is that steel rod that I talk about, where you're grinding it back and forth. And more, the mind just gets used to being in the middle and it doesn't bounce out. But you might have situations based on your cravings, desires, attachments, where the mind does bounce out. On your way to enlightenment, you're going to experience conditioned feelings. You're going to experience discontentedness. But more and more, as those things are occurring, you're restraining the mind and restraining it and bringing it back to the middle and trying to keep it in the middle. One of the analogies the Buddha gives here is he talks about this post or this pillar, and there's these 6 animals that are tied to this post and pillar, and they're all pulling in opposite directions. The birds going to the sky, the monkeys going to the jungle, the alligators going to the river, the jackals going to the woods. They're all pulling in different directions. And as they keep pulling and pulling and pulling, they keep getting yanked back to the post and pillar. They keep getting yanked back, but they keep pulling and pulling and pulling, and they keep getting yanked back and yanked back and yanked back. Eventually, those animals are going to realize that they're tied to this post and pillar, and they're just going to sit down by that post and pillar because they realize, hey, I can't go anywhere. I'm just going to stay here. Well, the mind is the same way. It's going to pull and pull and pull. It's going to want to go to this sluggish state, this dull, lethargic state. It's going to want to go to this excited state. It's going to be pulling and pulling and pulling. And what you're doing is you're bringing it back to the post or the pillar. And over time, the mind's going to be like, all right, I'm just going to stay here. I'm just going to stay focused. I'm just going to stay concentrated. Every time I try to go do some shenanigans in the world, you don't let me do it. So I'm just going to stay right here by this post or pillar, right? That's what the mind does. It ultimately figures out, hey, they're not going to let me do this, so I'm just going to stay here in the middle. So that's what these 7 factors are helping you do, to fine tune the mind. Okay, any questions on these? Steve?
Thank you, David. Very helpful. To state the obvious, mindfulness is not enough. Mm-hmm. So the word complacency has come up a number of times this week. So, yes, if I'm mindful that my mind is heading in this direction, which I'm aware is going to ultimately lead to unwholesome activity and trigger negative karma, blah, 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 there's a moment there where I've got to choose whether to take action, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I I know it's obvious, but it's just worth reminding myself. And sometimes it can be a bit of and it requires effort to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the right effort part. And see, this is where your wisdom's coming in. That if you understand the natural laws, that there are bodily sensations that's then going to move to a feeling, that's then going to affect the condition of the mind, and then it's going to feed this mental object, and now you've got this pollution that's in the mind. If you see that and you can see that life cycle, you have the wisdom to know, I got to jump on this. I can't be complacent, because if I'm complacent, I'm just going to keep feeding that mental object, and it's just going to make my job harder and harder to be able to purify this mind. So this is where you learn about the intellectual understanding, the wisdom of what's truly happening, and then the Buddha's giving you these tools to be able to take the action. So not being complacent is really important. That's why complacency is a hindrance to one's enlightenment. That's why it's part of the 5 hindrances. But yeah, you need to have your mindfulness, your awareness of mind, and then whenever there's anything unwholesome, apply right effort to cut it out and let it go. There's nothing on the path to enlightenment that just magically lets go. The mind's not going to do that. You have to apply real effort to accomplish it. That's why you can't just stumble into enlightenment. It's a conscious thing that you're working towards.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Dolce, you have a question or just working on the mic? Both.
With the 5 hindrances, one of them was, I think I was seeing it translated differently before. I think it was sloth and torpor. A lot of people would talk about. Is that like complacency you were talking about?
Yeah, that's a very old word translation. Sloth and torpor. Anybody here know what sloth and torpor is? Right? Very few people in the world, right? So I use the word complacency because that's what that's referring to. Complacency is a huge hindrance to enlightenment. But a lot of times people have translated and then people just hold on to other people's translations. So this sloth and torpor has been around probably since the early 1900s, and people have been continuing to use that, where what I've chosen to do is provide modern words that we're using to represent these teachings that the Buddha shares.
Yeah. In meditation, sometimes, like, I would experience these hindrances coming up at varying times, almost very suddenly and intensely. And sometimes it would be like I wouldn't see it coming. It would just kind of like be out of a blind spot.
Yeah, the reason why you can't see it is because there's no mindfulness. You need to have the mindfulness to be able to see these hindrances. So that's why the 7 factors of enlightenment are so key to helping you eliminate your hindrances, but also helping you to eliminate all the cravings, desires, attachments. So breathing mindfulness meditation is so important to help you cultivate your mindfulness, but then you need to practice it at all times during your day, from when you're first starting to wake up all day long, and then as you're going to sleep, to be aware of what's going on in the mind.
And could you go over that part again? That was very helpful. You were talking about how you could use particular like factor of enlightenment or that, like particular hindrances.
Yeah, so I'm going to go through each individual hindrance, and I'm going to explain what it is, and then I'm going to show you what the solution is for each individual hindrance. Here, I'm just making sure you guys understand what the 7 factors of enlightenment are. Do you understand the 7 factors? Okay, you understand those? Okay. So yeah, you'll get more. This is just kind of like a mid-discussion pause to be sure you guys are understanding these.
David, we've been, me and my wife, through her yoga studio, have been practicing mindfulness meditation for almost 3 years now. 5 days a week-ish. But it's...
Hold your mic.
Oh, okay. But I was never able to go anywhere with it, you know, like it was beautiful that it gave me a little space, which was noticeable, but now it's like, okay, it's going to give me the space so that I may be aware. I like how you mentioned like the guardsman at the gate, and it watches out for these things that arise in my character. But it's really nice to be able to take what I've learned so far and apply it much further now that you've taught this to us. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. One of the analogies I give to understand right mindfulness is, you guys are familiar with computers. You're familiar with a virus scanner, how a virus scanner is kind of running in the background. It's just sitting there, and it's kind of looking over your hard drive, and it's looking over the memory of the computer. And it's just in the background. You know, the computer on a day-to-day basis, you don't even necessarily think about that it's sitting there running. And then whenever a virus hits the hard drive, boom, it kicks into action and it does something. It isolates that virus. It, you know, puts it in a quarantine, and then you're able to clean it out of the hard drive. So your mindfulness is the same way. It's just sitting there running like an app in the background. And then whenever you notice any kind of unwholesomeness coming up in the mind, that's where right effort comes in, and boom, you do something to be able to cut it off and let it go. So this is a modern way to think about it is with the virus scanner, which didn't exist during the lifetime of the Buddha. And he talked about it as this guard, because that's what the virus scanner is it's a guard. It's guarding your hard drive from viruses or pollutions, right? And that's what your mindfulness is doing, is it's guarding your mind from these pollutions that can potentially come in. And whenever you notice that, boom, you apply right effort to cut it off and let it go. And that's what cleans it up and gets rid of it. Okay, let me see if we have any questions about these online. I don't see any questions there. Okay, so let's go through each of these 5 hindrances. First, central desire. Let's be sure you guys understand what this is. We've talked about it already in this course, but here we're going to visit it again. What central desire is this is where the mind is trying to please itself through the sense bases, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself. The mind, because of central desire, is craving permanently agreeable contact. The mind, through the eyes, wants to see things that are permanently agreeable. And when you see things that are agreeable to you, you get happy, you get excited. But when you see things that are disagreeable, you get frustrated or agitated or annoyed, those painful feelings. The analogy I gave you guys, or the story I gave you guys, is say you're walking down the street, you see a parent holding their child's hand, and it's like, oh, that's so lovely. Look at that. Oh, I like that. The child's walking so nicely with their parents. Oh, that's so beautiful. Children are walking down the street, they're playing, they're having fun with their parents. But then if you allow your mind to get those conditioned pleasant feelings, now you turn the corner and you see a parent slap their child across their face. This is maybe disagreeable to the mind because you're seeing something through the eyes. And now the mind is experiencing these painful feelings because it's maybe craving, longing, yearning for everybody to be treated a certain way, right? We're not talking about what's wise or unwise, right? Because it's, in my opinion, unwise to hit a child, right? But we're just talking about what's causing the mind to be discontent in this situation. It's craving, it's longing, it's yearning, it's having central desire. It wants to see things that are permanently agreeable. And because of impermanence, you can't have things and see things that are permanently agreeable. Another analogy I give on this one is, say you look outside, you see the sun. That's maybe agreeable to you. But now you look outside and you see it's raining, and maybe that's disagreeable to you. So when you see the sun, because of central desire, you get happy. But then when you see the rain, you get sad or frustrated. This is because of central desire. The mind in the unenlightened state is craving permanently agreeable contact through the sense bases. Same thing's happening with the ears. You could be driving down the street. Someone pulls up to you at a red light with some good music. You're like, all right, that's my jam. Yeah, let's go. Come on, party time. Party, 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 right? But then you go to the next traffic light. Somebody else pulls up to you. Now there's some disagreeable sounds that you're hearing through the ears. Now you're frustrated, you're agitated, because the mind wants things to be permanently agreeable, and it can't get that because it's in an impermanent world. You can't get things to be permanently agreeable to you. The same thing's happening with the nose, right? You smell someone's cologne or perfume. It's like, oh, wow, that smells good. Or you smell some food or some cookies or chocolate cake or carrot cake or cheesecake or something. It's like, oh, wow, that's good. But then you're walking down the street and you smell the sewer, right? Or maybe somebody farted or something, right? Or you smell like a waste management facility or something. The mind's repulsed by this, right? This sewer smell, it's so repulsed, and it wants to push this thing away. The mind's craving permanently agreeable contact through the nose because of its sensual desire. Same thing with the tongue. Certain flavors that you taste, certain foods, you just really, really think this is the best food. But then you taste something else, maybe sour, bitter, whatever, and now the mind's repulsed by that. And then the same thing's happening with the bodily contact. Certain fabrics on the body are agreeable or disagreeable, or maybe somebody bumps into you and you see that as disagreeable and you get angry and frustrated. And then you can have certain things in the mind too, where the mind is looking to the past about certain pleasurable things that happened in the past. And now in the present moment, you can get pleasant feelings based on things that you're remembering from the past. But also there can be painful things in your past that now you're thinking about those things. There hasn't been any contact through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, but it's all through the mind. This is the sixth sense base. We usually only learn 5 senses when we're in college or high school, going through biology or whatever it is that we've learned the 5 senses, right? But this mind is a 6th sense base, where the mind itself, it doesn't have any contact with anything. It's just the mind thinking about the past or the future, and now forming pleasant feelings or painful feelings based on the condition of thinking about this particular thing, right? So this is what central desire is doing. The mind is longing, yearning through the sense bases, wanting permanently agreeable contact. And if it gets that, it gets the conditioned pleasant feelings. And if it doesn't get that, it gets the painful feelings. So the way to solve this, you guys may already know because you've been studying to a certain degree, is to eliminate the craving, desire, attachment with breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and by practicing generosity. These are the 2 things that are targeting the central desire. And you need to be practicing mindfulness all the time, because whenever you notice the bodily sensations associated with your cravings arising, you need to cut it off and let it go. So that's what we say, guarding the doorways to discontentedness. Anytime you've ever been discontent in your entire life, you can look and you can trace it back to one or more of these doorways. You either saw something you disagreed with and you got angry and frustrated, or you heard something, you smelled something, you tasted something, some contact with the body, or something in the mind that the mind was thinking about. And this is actually really helpful for you as you're working to eliminate your cravings, desires, attachments. Because there was a time when I was working on eliminating my attachment to coffee, because I was drinking a lot of coffee and there was a lot of caffeine and my mind was in this excited state and I was trying to get rid of it. And there were times where I would go 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks without a coffee. And I thought that I was done with the coffee because I'd been 8 weeks away from the coffee. And I ended up walking down this street and I got pulled into this coffee shop. My mind went into this coffee shop and I stood in line and I was telling myself, like, this is crazy. What are you doing? You know, you've been away from this stuff for 8 weeks. You know, you're just going to get headaches and withdrawal symptoms. What are you doing? And I got this coffee and I sat down, I drank a little bit of it and then I threw it away. And that was the last coffee I ever drank. But afterwards I started reflecting. I was like, what was it? Why did I go into that coffee shop? There was some doorway. The smell. I was walking down the street and I smelled that coffee, and that's what got me into the coffee shop. I wasn't guarding that doorway, right? I wasn't guarding the doorway. So then what I started doing for the next several weeks and months is I started guarding that doorway, that I started even using my eyes to look to see on the street if there were any coffee shops. And for a little while, I would go around the coffee shops. I would go to the other side of the street so I wouldn't smell it. And this was me guarding the mind. And now, of course, I can go into a coffee shop, I can sit there, I can smell it, and I'm not tempted to have a cup of coffee. But for that certain period of time where the mind was sensitive and it hadn't yet let go of that craving, knowing about these doorways, it was really helpful because I was able to trace exactly what it was. What was the doorway that I allowed the central desire to arise? And it was through the nose. So that allowed me to then use my wisdom to take action to now start getting that doorway away from that odor, because I saw it as a pleasant odor and I was drawn into the coffee shop. So this is one of the reasons why it's so important to know the 6 sense bases, because you can trace down exactly what doorway was your mind drawn into this particular craving, and now you can guard the mind based on that particular doorway. Okay, so central desire is eradicated through eliminating craving, desire, attachment. You're cultivating breathing mindfulness meditation in order to help you with your letting go, letting go, letting go. And the same thing with generosity is training the mind to let go. And then in daily life, you're guarding the doorways with your mindfulness. And wherever you see that craving is arising, you cut it off and let it go. And you'll be able to do that if you're doing breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity. Okay, so this is the first hindrance that can keep you trapped in the unenlightened state, because the mind just doesn't want to let go of that sweet, milky flavor of the coffee, right? It just doesn't want to let it go. Oh, it's so great, right? It's so wonderful. Oh, the mind wants that so badly, right? So now the second hindrance is ill will. We might also think of this as anger, hatred, hostility, bitterness, aggression, resentment, frustration, irritation, annoyance. All of that's coming from the ill will. Ill will is a pretty strong word, but there's these lesser versions of it. It's like a spectrum, right? This is a mental object that as it's slowly being eliminated, you'll see lesser and lesser versions of this, where at different points in your life, you might have had rage about certain things. Maybe now it's a little bit less. And as you're training your mind with loving kindness meditation and practicing loving kindness in daily life, it'll be even less and less and less and less and less, but it's still coming from the same thing. Even if you have a dislike towards somebody, you're like, I just don't like him, or I just don't like her. Oh, I just don't like the way she looks. I don't like the way he looks. I don't like the way he talks. This is the mind having that central desire. That's why these things are usually together, that the mind wants everybody to talk a certain way or look a certain way. And when that central desire isn't getting fulfilled, this is when the ill will is arising, right? So you need to be observant of this ill will and continually work with loving kindness meditation and practicing loving kindness in daily life. This is the breaking up of that mental object. The loving kindness is like a jackhammer. This loving kindness meditation is jackhammering this ill will and breaking it up and getting it out of the mind. And you'll see it'll be less and less and less and less intense as you're practicing this, and you're gradually wearing it away. Okay? Then we've got complacency. What complacency is, or it's often translated as sloth and torpor. You might see this in some of the very old translations. People use sloth and torpor. It's dullness, lethargic condition, this lack of motivation. You sometimes see that the mind has this, whether it's related to studying the teachings of the Buddha or just general life. You might just wake up one day and you're like, I'm just going to veg out on the sofa, right? And if you need to do that and you need to rest and relax sometimes, do it. Right? But don't allow that to be 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days where you're just completely dull and lethargic and you're not actually applying any kind of energy or effort towards improving your life. So if you see that the mind's dull and lethargic, you're going to need to lift it up out of that state. So you would like to use the enlightenment factors of investigation, energy, and joy, the ones that I just talked about. Now, the mind can be complacent in terms of it doesn't want to wash the dishes. It doesn't want to do laundry. It doesn't want to do these things. You're going to need to apply the energy and effort to do those things when you need to do it. But it can also be complacent about investigating the teachings and learning the teachings of the Buddha. And that's the solution. With the mind being down in its complacency, if it's not investigating the teachings, it's never going to get to the middle. So that's why the solution for this is to investigate the teachings. Whereas if you just sat around and you were dull and lethargic all the time and you didn't investigate the teachings, you wouldn't get the wisdom that you need to bring the mind to the middle. So that's why investigation is going to bring that mind out of the sluggish state, because it doesn't want to apply its effort and energy to do something. So this is what's going to help you to bring the mind to the middle and get out of that dullness and that lethargic condition. As we talked about other times in the course, not only did the Buddha mention about complacency, but he described it in such level of detail that he said, if you're essentially walking down the street and you have an unwholesome thought and you don't do anything about it, that's complacency. We think about complacency as being dull and lethargic, sitting on the sofa, maybe not meditating, not reading books, not coming to the temple. Yeah, that's all complacency. But he even described it to the level of detail. If there's a unwholesome thought that comes into your mind and you do nothing about it, or some discontentedness that comes into your mind and you do nothing about it, that's complacency too. So investigating, having energy and joy, this is what's going to bring you out of that complacency so you can take action. Any questions on any of these three? Okay, looks like Rachel has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
I have a question on sensual desire. In the neighborhood, there is a waste management facility, and every time I pass by it, I hold my breath because the smell is really strong and really unpleasant. So we do this like practice. What will you suggest me to do when I pass by the facility?
Yeah, what I encourage you to do is take nice, long, deep breaths and learn that this smell is impermanent. The mind wants to do just the opposite. Oftentimes, the mind's going to do just the opposite. It's repulsed by this thing and it wants to push it away. But remember, what I've been sharing is that you oftentimes need to put the mind in the situation that it's repulsed by and train it to be comfortable and content. So just like with the spider or the snake, when I was talking about eliminating fears, you need to put the mind in that situation in order to eliminate the craving, desire, attachment. In this kind of situation where you're repulsed by a certain smell, you need to actually put the mind in that situation until it eliminates its craving. So if there's a certain smell, or say there's a certain food, at one time I didn't like the fruit of durian and I was repulsed by this fruit, and I've talked about this at different times. The fruit of durian, I've never had poop in my mouth, but if I did, I think it would be just like this fruit, because the consistency of the fruit, the smell of the fruit, all of this stuff, the first time I tasted it, it was like eating poop. Even though I've never eaten poop before, it seemed like it was just like that. So I was repulsed by this fruit for a while. But what I needed to do is I needed to put my mind in the situation in order to overcome that and just see it as food and something to nourish the body. So what I did is I started eating durian inside of something that I liked, which was cakes. They sell these durian cakes at Thai grocery stores, and I started eating durian cakes, and I actually tasted pretty good. And then after I did that for a while, then I actually started eating the fruit, the raw fruit, and then it was just fine for me. After that, the mind had gradually moved towards not seeing this as repulsive. I had let go of the craving. So you're going to need to do the same thing with this particular smell. Is I would say, go visit this place, go stand on the side of the road and just be there. And you might need to do that multiple times and just remind yourself that it is impermanent, that you're not going to be there permanently, that eventually you're going to walk away. So if you need to pull over your car or take a walk near that waste management facility, that is what will help you to be able to let go of any craving permanently agreeable smells or odors. You're never going to have permanently agreeable odors. So trying to hold your breath or push this away, it doesn't actually work because the craving is still in place. So you would like to put the mind in that situation so it has the opportunity to eliminate its craving, and then you can be liberated from that. So that in the future, when you're driving down the street and you smell that odor of the waste management facility, your mind just already knows, like, it's impermanent. It'll be 5 seconds, 10 seconds, however long it is, and then it's over. No need to be repulsed by it because the craving has been eliminated.
What if I still hold my breath, but to try to make my mind, or bring my mind to be more peaceful?
You could try that, but holding the breath is the mind trying to push this thing away. I would encourage you to go breathe it in. I know it sounds like, oh, I don't want to do that. No, teacher, don't tell me that. And that's exactly why it's important to do it, because the mind doesn't want to do it. It wants things to be permanently agreeable. So you're going to need to put the mind in these situations sometimes in order to train it that it can be comfortable. There were times where I had to do these kinds of things myself, where I noticed the mind was repulsed by a particular thing and I needed to put the mind in that situation in order to get rid of the craving. Because when you put your mind in that situation where it's smelling that waste management, you're going to notice the discontentedness is going to start to arise, and it's going to come up as a bodily sensation, and you cut it off, and you cut it off, and you cut it off. And this is what's going to train the mind to get rid of this craving. Whereas if you just hold your breath, it's like sweeping the dust under the carpet. You would like to pull the carpet back, let the dust fly all around, and get it out of the house. So that's what you're doing when you're putting your mind in the situation, is you're pulling back the carpet and getting the dust out of the house. When you're holding your breath, you're just sweeping the dust under the carpet, but the dust is still there. The craving is still there inside the mind. You're welcome. Looks like Leo has a question as well.
Yeah, just want to know how deep you go into this smell, like just being in the situation, or really, so you said, soak it in and try to be really mindful of how it smells, where the different smell notes, maybe something like that. So, you know what I mean?
I wouldn't overthink it, right? So let's just say there's this facility and say you can walk towards it, right? And the smell when you're first getting there, it's not so bad yet. It's just a little bit of smell. I would hang out in that area for a little bit and just kind of get acclimated to that little bit of the smell, right? And now when the mind is a little bit acclimated, walk a little bit closer. You can get a little bit stronger, more pungent odor. And then when it gets comfortable with that, move a little bit closer and a little bit closer. But at any point, if the mind just can't take it anymore, then you get away and you go away and you slowly walk away and you go, regain the composure of the mind. And then maybe next week you do it again. And now you gradually work towards it. And eventually you get to the point where you can walk towards this odor, you can be in this odor, and the mind's completely peaceful. So don't overthink it in the way that you're describing, but just gradually tune the mind to the point where it's comfortable, whether you're in this odor or you're out of this odor.
And is it okay if I watch something on my phone while I'm being in this area where the smell is strong, or is it paying attention to the smell?
You would like to be attentive to the mind. So if you're looking at your phone, you're not going to be practicing mindfulness necessarily. So you would like to be attentive to the mind so you can cut it off and let it go, and cut it off and let it go. Anytime any kind of bodily sensations are arising or feelings, things like this, you would like to be attentive to that. If you need to redirect the mind towards other things, like maybe there's a certain view, there's this waste management facility that I used to pass by in America that was close to a river. And, if you need to look at the view and that's a way to distract the mind and kind of help it to let it go, you can do those kinds of things. But you would like to be practicing mindfulness while you're doing those things so that if any kind of bodily sensations or feelings arise, you can cut it off and let it go.
But because I think the mind likes to search for something which is more attractive, right? So if my eyes are open, I think I would look around.
Yeah,
watching the traffic. But
that's not what you're interested in, though. You're not interested in allowing the mind to crave and get attached to something else, but you can redirect the mind, particularly as you're first getting going with this type of activity. You can redirect the mind to something else. But ultimately, by the time this craving is going to get out of the mind, you're going to need to be able to just be in this odor without needing to redirect your mind and take it all over the place, because by the time you've done all of that work, the mind should be able to just reside stable and steady in the present moment and be unaffected by this odor.
And I also would like to know, how is it again with breathing mindfulness, with the meditation? Mm-hmm. How important is the sensation of the air, or of this air touching the skin? How much? Because if I do it, I realize that I'm just mindful of the breath coming in and out, and then sometimes I realize, maybe it would be better if I try to feel the touch of the air, or maybe hear the sound. Mm-hmm. So I come back to that, but then I forget it, and it's just in and out without a real focus on the sensation. What do you think about that?
So the object of your meditation is either the sound of the breath coming in or the sensation of the air over the skin into the nose. Those are the two places where the mind can easily focus on the breath, which the breath is the present moment. So either the sound or the sensation coming over the skin into the nose.
So if I'm not really watching the sensation, do I something wrong? Because I'm aware of that I'm breathing. I'm aware of that. Mm-hmm. But I'm not particularly, my concentration is not on this sensation directly sometimes. So
yeah, I encourage students to focus on the sound of the breath, because I think this works best. But there's some environments where it's a bit noisy and you can't hear the breath, and that's where the sensation comes in, the sensation of the air. That's what you would like to focus on. And if you don't have that ability right now, you need to develop that ability. Doche, you have a question?
With the enlightened factor of joy, I can see a meditator or some practitioner walking the path, if it gets to the point where you can kind of bring about these enlightenment factors, I'm kind of thinking there's like a wholesome uses, like the wholesome use would be, I'm thinking like possibly using it to combat complacency and then be able to continue studying teachings and working, but then just sitting about basking in joy and not doing anything would become the opposite, being very complacent. But then is there like a middle way? Like, can you use this joy to kind of recharge your battery? Or like, should you be working with these enlightenment factors? Like, I'm trying to get an understanding of when there's like more wholesome uses, or is it just something that, that you can just enjoy? Like,
So all these enlightenment factors, while they're used as tools to fine-tune the mind and bring it out of the sluggish state and bring it out of the excited state, by the time you get to enlightenment, you're actually practicing all 7 all the time. So there is no depletion of energy when you get to enlightenment. You can have sustained energy all through your day. You don't ever need to recharge your battery, so to speak. Now you have that experience where sometimes you go out into the world and it might be a good day or it might be a bad day, or you might feel exhausted, or you might have more energy. This is the mind and the body going up and down and up and down. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you have sustained energy all day long. So you don't need to recharge your batteries. So you use these qualities to lift the mind up, to get the mind to the middle. But then more and more, it just practices all of these 7 factors at all times. They're always on.
so I guess I don't need to like avoid them. If I'm working with them, I can try to work with them more and more and try to cultivate them, or see if they can be sustainable and there all the time.
Yeah, that's what you'd like to do, is be able to sustain these long term, because this joy that we're talking about is not conditional. It's unconditioned joy, where the mind's just joyful, where you wake up in the morning and you're just smiling. Why? No reason, just joy. The mind's just joyful, right? So you can get to that point where, so wherever you see the mind's not doing that, that's what you would like to apply the effort to bring the mind into that unconditioned joy, so that the mind can just be joyful all the time, realizing that it's not going to be, because the mind's unenlightened. But where you see the mind's not joyful, like say you're sitting at a bus stop and you're feeling irritated because the bus not there and it's a little bit hot and you're starting to get complaining, maybe because you're so sweaty. You're like, no, I'm not going to let the mind do that. I'm going to be joyful. You know what? Yeah, I'm sweating. Hey, it's like a free sauna. Right? So it's like you're changing your perspective of the way you look at the world. My son and I, sometimes, I know this is very personal and might gross some of you guys out, but sometimes, when we're at home, somebody might fart, right? And I'm like, oh, thank you so much. You scented the air. Right? So you change your perspective of the way you look at things. You go outside and it's so hot. It's like, oh, well, I get a free sauna. Wow, this is so nice of Thailand. Thank you, Thailand, for the free sauna. Right? Or sometimes I have like problems in my colon, where every once in a while I have, a bout of diarrhea. It doesn't happen very often now because of eating plant-based food, but, in the past I used to get that pretty frequently. So I used to say, oh, free colon cleanse. I get a free colon cleanse. Yeah, my colon's getting cleaned out, right? So instead of like, oh, I've got diarrhea, this is so horrible, oh, I'm so miserable, you can just look at things from a positive side. And this is going to help your mind to come into that brightness and that radiance and that uplifted state. Even the Buddha talks about this, where he says, all day long, you need to work to actively keep your mind in that brightened state. And eventually, as you do that more and more, you won't have to apply the effort to keep it in that brightened state, because it'll just always be there. But on your way to enlightenment, you're going to need to apply the effort to bring in these qualities like brightening up the mind. But more and more, as you are able to bring it into that state, it'll just stay there. So where you see the mind is in the darkness and complaining and disgruntled, maybe grumpy because you didn't get your coffee, or maybe grumpy because you didn't sleep quite well, you would like to brighten up the mind and bring it into the middle. And as you do that more readily, not allowing the mind to dwell in this grumpiness, it'll stay in this brightened state. But if you allow it to stay in this grumpiness, that's the complacency, and that's going to keep the mind wired that way. So if any time you see the mind in that grumpiness or the sluggishness or any of these unwholesome states, you would like to brighten up the mind. But then also when you see it overactive and excited, you would like to calm it down. And then more and more it gets used to being in the middle, that steel rod that I talk about. You're welcome.
David, I'll hold it close. Pardon, but the cynic in me, we speak of enlightenment here freely, obviously, and that being the the end goal. It just, I tell myself how impossible it would be. That sounds all fine and fancy for you, but I don't know. You speak of it like it's attainable, and obviously it is. But I'm thinking about when I go back to the States in 3 weeks, and I'm back in the grind. How do I actually apply these things in my day to day? And as I'm saying that, I can see that I can incorporate some of these things in, and hopefully all of them, and continue learning. But it's so nice here. Vacation in Thailand, amazing meditation the past couple of mornings and teachings. I could do it here, man, but I think about back to, I don't want to call it the grind, but back to life, and
Yeah, there's no doubt that it's more challenging to learn and practice when you're not in this environment, but it's not unsurmountable. I have students all over the world that study with me. In fact, for the first several years, most of the students were learning with me online because of COVID. For 3 years, I was teaching a lot of people online, and I still do because I have live stream. So you can get to enlightenment while being in America. It is accessible. It is attainable. But right now, you haven't learned the Eightfold Path with me yet. And this is the core central teaching. You're taking in teachings that this is like things that people learn well after they've got a well-established Eightfold Path. So what I would encourage you to do is go back to the beginning, which is the first book, volume 1, and start from the first chapter. And the way that you incorporate this into your life is just step by step. Because when you're standing at the bottom of the mountain looks really tall. And it's like, how could I ever climb that mountain? But when you're halfway up the mountain, or even a quarter of the way up the mountain, you're like, hey, I can do this. This is not so bad after all. But when you're at the bottom of the mountain, you can't even fathom how you're ever going to get to the top. But the way you get to the top is one step at a time, right? So right now, this is like step 100 that you're talking about, because this is like a course where we're going into a lot of detail about some very specific things. But for you, I would encourage you to start from the beginning, which is volume 1, and then you slowly but surely be learning, because I have the Sunday and Wednesday classes, which would be ideal for you, the group learning program, and you can come in through Zoom or live stream, and you can be reading the book, and then you can be getting personal guidance too, as you need that online. I have the ability for you to schedule in Zoom when you go back to America. So I lived in America for a long time, and yeah, it's challenging to practice there, but there's plenty of people who are learning and practicing from America and experiencing all kinds of improvement. So right now, the grind that you call it, the life that you've got in America, you aren't particularly happy with that life. And that's the whole thing, that you need this wisdom to be able to now improve that life. And yeah, it doesn't feel good being in that life. And that's the whole reason why learning this wisdom, that's the solution to be able to fix that life and making wise decisions to improve it. And you've got help to be able to do that, which you didn't have before. Right? Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. Oh, there we go. Rachel's got one. Go ahead, ma'am.
I just thought of another situation. I take a nap every day after lunch, and the nap is really important for me. Sometimes, like when I need to go out, or when I need to visit a friend or visit a place, I want to be able to take a nap. Then the afternoon will become terrible, because and also the evening will become not good, because I lack of the nap energy to go through the afternoon and the evening. And this has been an issue for me many years. And also after nap, it's difficult for me to wake up from the nap to the afternoon, because it's kind of feel like I'm dead, and then come back to life again. So I think it's associated with sensual desire of the body. But do you have any tip for me? How can I not be so attached to the nap, and then would have more freedom in my life?
Yeah, so this is a craving for sleep, right? And a certain amount of sleep. So you're going to need to, when you're waking up and the mind's grumpy and irritable because you didn't get the amount of sleep that the mind wanted, you're going to have to brighten up the mind. You're going to need to let that go. I don't know if you guys can tell, I only slept for 1 hour last night. Didn't sleep more than an hour because I was doing some different things. I took a nap when I got home yesterday. I had like a 3-hour nap when I got home, and I just wasn't sleepy. So I just had a 1 hour sleep, but my mind's not grumpy. It's not irritable. It's not frustrated because I don't have this craving to sleep 6 hours or 8 hours every day. Of course, that's what I shoot for. That's my goal. But there's some days where, hey, the mind just didn't sleep last night. I just had 1 hour of sleep. Went to sleep around 5 o'clock, or maybe a little bit after. No, it was closer to 6, and woke up around 7, right? So you can brighten up the mind this way. And when you're noticing the grumpiness, that's what the mindfulness is there for, that you know that, hey, don't allow the mind to dwell on this grumpiness, and brighten up the mind and bring the mind to this brightened state. And it's going to feel painful and it's going to hurt, but that's what you would like to be able to do. So you're going to have situations where you don't always sleep 6 or 8 hours or however many hours you typically get. And being grumpy and irritable is the problem. The cause of that problem is the craving, wanting to sleep a certain amount. And you can eliminate that from the mind and get to the point where you don't feel grumpy and irritable when you haven't had a certain amount of sleep. So you're going to need to apply right mindfulness to be aware when the mind is in that condition, and then apply right effort to be able to bring the mind up into that brightened state. And then it'll just always stay there because you don't have a craving for a certain amount of sleep.
I think for me, mind is one thing. The more controlling thing is the body, because I think it's the body. It wants to have a nap. Mm-hmm. It doesn't want to wake up, and I couldn't resist the power of the body.
It's not the body. The mind is the boss. The body's the employee. The body's just following along. So when your mind is tranquil, the body will be tranquil. But when your mind's stressed and having anxiety, you're going to have painful bodily sensations in the body. So while you think it is the body right now, in true reality, it's all coming from the mind. So you can train to eliminate this. One of the challenges on the path, and you've been studying for a little while now, Rachel, one of the challenges is to intellectually understand what you should be doing and what you would like the mind to do, but the mind just doesn't do it. It won't do it, right? So like, you've heard me say many times to practice breathing mindfulness meditation and practice generosity, practice the Eightfold Path, using your mindfulness, apply right effort to cut this off and let it go. So this is what you need to do in order to get rid of that craving, desire, attachment to the sleep. And you're going to need to be dedicated, diligent, and determined to be able to apply this consistently over a long-term period before the mind will finally let go of that craving to sleep. And now you won't have that grumpiness anymore. So you're probably going to have this grumpiness for a number of months before your mind finally lets go of this craving to the sleep. So this is where the next part of these 5 hindrances comes in, is where you need to develop confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to attain enlightenment. And with that confidence, you'll be able to be dedicated, determined, and diligent to consistently apply this wisdom that you're learning for the mind to ultimately release this attachment. The words that the Buddha used on this is he describes it as maturing in release, that your mind needs to mature and mature and mature and mature, and then eventually it releases the attachment. So you're going to go through a period of time where you'll intellectually know what you should be doing, and you're trying to do that consistently, but the mind just hasn't let go yet. And then eventually it will let go if you keep applying enough effort to do the things that I'm sharing with you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go into the next 2, which is number 4 and 5 of the 5 hindrances. Number 4 is restlessness and worry. This is where the mind is confused, distracted, has a restless state of mind, and there's worry of your own unskillful conduct. Okay, so the restlessness part, this is part of the 10 fetters, the confusion, the distracted, restless state. This is where I was talking on Tuesday about like the bodily movements where you're bouncing your knee, you're tapping your finger, you're tapping a pencil. There's this overactive, repetitive, obsessive thing that's happening. It's happening in the mind, but it's coming out through the body because the mind is the boss and the body's the employee. So if you're sitting there tapping your knee or shaking your knee or tapping your finger, this is because the mind's overactive. It's restless. Okay. And then there's this other part that is going to hinder you from being able to get to enlightenment, which is the worry of your own unskillful conduct. Sometimes the more aware you become of the natural law of karma, you might actually take it too far, where your mind becomes worried about every last little thing that you do that is a mistake, so to speak, or a misstep. And you're so worried about every little tiny thing that your mind becomes obsessive about every little thing that you're doing. Well, this is going to hinder you from enlightenment if you have restlessness in the mind, overactivity and anxiety, or if you have worry in your mind about worrying about every little thing that you do. You need to be conscious and aware of the things that you're doing and be able to improve that. But worrying to the point to your own detriment, this is going to hinder you from being able to get to enlightenment. So the way that you solve this is with the enlightenment factors of tranquility, concentration, and equanimity, because that's the mind being in that overactive state. So you're bringing in the tranquility, that peacefulness, that stillness of mind, the concentration, be able to focus on a single object, and the equanimity, the calmness and composure. That's what's going to help you remedy this. So this is restlessness and worry. Then the fifth hindrance that's going to hinder someone from getting to enlightenment is doubt. And I see this all the time. This is why this room can fill up with 60 people. I can start talking about the path to enlightenment, and maybe 2/3 of them, or 80% of them will start walking out, because when I start talking about this mental state of enlightenment, they're like, no way, the mind, there's just no way it can do that. There's all this doubt, right? And people have doubt when they first come to the path. And of course, some of those people, they have other plans, they weren't planning to be here, what have you. But doubt is a big hindrance, because people doubt whether or not this is even true, right? People don't necessarily think that even enlightenment is attainable. They think how easy is it to get to enlightenment? Well, it's not easy, but it's not difficult either. But if there's doubt, then this will hinder somebody from getting to enlightenment. Someone can doubt whether the Buddha existed. They can doubt the teachings that he shared. They can doubt this community and think that this community can't necessarily help them. They can doubt me as a teacher, and they can have doubt about their own ability to get to enlightenment. And any of these kinds of doubts is going to hinder somebody, because they're not going to be willing to go forth and apply effort. I've even seen some students study with me for 2-3 years sometimes, and their doubt arises, and they end up going away from the path to enlightenment. They start having all this doubt about certain things because it gets really challenging at certain times on the path to enlightenment. And sometimes people are looking for an off-ramp. The mind is just looking for some justification for the reason why I don't need to do this thing, and I'm going to go over here and do this other thing. And oftentimes it's doubt that arises, either doubt in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, or your own ability to get to enlightenment. The way that you address this and you remedy this is through investigation of the teachings. That you investigate, you learn, reflect, and practice the teachings. We talked about this on Tuesday. That's the way you eliminate doubt, not through blind belief or faith or anything like that, but through investigating the teachings. And that's what's going to ultimately arise the confidence, because the more you examine and investigate the teachings, the more you reflect on them and you see that they're true, and the more you practice them and you see the condition of your mind improving, you'll get to the point where you have no doubt, right? So this is how you eliminate doubt. You can actually harness this doubt to turn the mind into an inquisitive mind, right? Because when I came to the path to enlightenment, I had doubt, and probably you do too. Maybe you still have doubt, right? And if you have doubt, harness it. Like, yeah, I doubt the teachings of the Buddha. I don't know whether they're true or I'm not talking now, but in the past, that's the way that I would think, is like, yeah, I don't know whether these teachings are true or not. I'm not sure. Right? I doubt whether they're true or false. Let me investigate them. Let me sink my teeth in. Let me roll up my sleeves and figure this out. And the deeper you get into it, you realize, oh my goodness, these are true. They work. They're real. Enlightenment is real. It's a real thing that you can experience. So if there's doubt in the mind, this is going to hinder somebody from getting to enlightenment. The opposite of doubt is confidence. And you're going to need that confidence, because at different times during the path to enlightenment, you can face real struggles. You can face real difficulties, and you're going to need that confidence to pull you through. That confidence is going to arise the determination, the dedication, and the diligence. You're going to need that. Your enlightenment isn't going to be determined on whether you come to this 5-day course or not. Your enlightenment is not going to be determined whether you meditate today or not. Your enlightenment is going to be determined that over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, are you able to consistently learn and understand the teachings consistently over a long-term period? Are you able to consistently meditate over a long-term period? Are you able to stay determined, dedicated, and diligent for a consistent long-term period? There may be things in your life where you haven't been able to do that before, where you kind of do something for 6 months and then you go away from it, or you do it for 2 or 3 years, then you go away from it. But this is going to need to be that thing that you stick with for a consistent long-term period. If you miss meditation today, okay, so be it. What do you do next? If you decide not to come to class today, okay, so be it. What do you do next? Can you consistently string together a whole bunch of wise decisions to learn the teachings and practice them? That's what's going to determine if you get to enlightenment. And that's what's going to eliminate your doubt, because the more improvement you see to the condition of the mind, the less doubt you're going to have, because you know situations where you were once discontent, angry or frustrated, and now that same situation is occurring and you're not angry or frustrated anymore. Your mind's quite peaceful. Right? I used to have this same situation as Rachel, that when I used to wake up, I used to be grumpy and irritable and nasty to people if I hadn't slept, or if I was hungry, if the body was hungry, I would be grumpy and irritable and nasty to people, right? And when you see that that's not happening anymore, you know that your mind's been transformed, right? So you'll see these situations where your mind's becoming more bright and more peaceful, but you need to apply the dedication and diligence to do that. And slowly but surely, this doubt will be eliminated. So these are the 5 hindrances and the remedies and the solutions for them. But there's really one hindrance, which is the biggest hindrance of them all. The Buddha doesn't list it here within the 5 hindrances, but he talks about it because there's more than just 5 hindrances. This is just one layer of detail. There's actually a much deeper teaching that goes into even more hindrances than this. But he talks about the main hindrance of all hindrances is the ignorance, the unknowing of true reality, the confusion, the delusion, the misunderstanding, the misperception. That's the biggest hindrance of all hindrances. Because if you don't have the understanding of the natural laws of existence, if you don't know how to meditate, if you don't know the Four Noble Truths, the 3 Universal Truths, the Eightfold Path, if you lack wisdom of these things, it will hinder you from getting to enlightenment. So that's like the biggest hindrance of all hindrances. Ignorance of the 5 hindrances, ignorance of the 10 fetters, ignorance of the natural law of karma, ignorance of meditation training and all these other things, ignorance of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So anytime there's an unknowing of true reality, this is the hindrance of all hindrances. You don't see it listed here in the 5 hindrances, but the Buddha talks about it in other places as a hindrance. So you can always keep that in mind. And that's why I guide students from the very beginning, when they first start studying with me, to cultivate wisdom. Don't believe anything I say, because you can't get to enlightenment through belief. You need that wisdom. That's what's going to transform the ignorance. So I share this with you as part of this talk on 5 hindrances. Continue to cultivate wisdom. That's what's going to help you eradicate all these hindrances. So any questions on the 5 hindrances at all? On restlessness and worry or doubt? Okay. So we talked about mindfulness a good deal in this particular class, and then also in other parts of the course. I just put this up here just to refresh your memory. Is there anything that you guys need to ask about right mindfulness? Because right mindfulness is so key to eradicate the 5 hindrances and ultimately get to enlightenment, because you need it in order to be aware of discontentedness as arising or some unwholesome thought, not just the hindrances, but any kind of thing that's unwholesome. You're going to need to make sure you understand right mindfulness. Is there any questions around right mindfulness? You have a question? Yep. Oh, restlessness. Sure. Yeah, we can go back.
I think I know it, but I realize here that I sometimes do like this.
Mm-hmm.
Or something, I don't know.
If you need to scratch your leg, right?
Yeah, but these, with the hand, I think it's more restlessness.
If it's a repetitive thing,
yeah.
If it's an obsessive thing, that's what you would like to stop.
Okay, so I realize it, stop it.
Yeah, if you know that that's a repetitive thing, you need to stop it. And you need to restrain the mind and don't allow the mind to do it. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see if we have any questions online about right mindfulness. All right, I don't see any. So usually what I do is I take a little break here because we've been talking now for, about an hour and a half or so. And then, we sometimes take an early lunch like this and we go out for a group lunch and then we come back. But the topic that I have to talk to you guys after lunch, it'll probably take me about 10, maybe 15 minutes to teach it to you. So if you guys like, maybe we'll take like a little break here. We can come back and then I'll teach you that topic. And then if you guys would like to end the class there, end the course there, if you'd like to just go home, or if you'd like to go have a group lunch, or if you'd like to spend time cleaning up the temple, you can decide that afterwards. But does that sound better to you guys, that we do that little topic before lunch, and then that way we're kind of done for the day? Does that sound good? Okay, so why don't we do that? So when we come back from our little break, I'm going to teach you how to determine if you have attained enlightenment. So right now it's basically about 11 o'clock. So why don't we say 11:15? And then that way we'll talk from there. Okay, so enjoy your break.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.